Okay, so here are some definitions and key terms for resisting social influence. If you want to have a go at matching them up, are in your booklet. So 1 goes with D, 2 is with A, 3 is with E, 4 is with B, 5 with F, and 6 with C. You need to make sure that for a shorter answer question in the exam, you can define these key terms. So far we have looked at conformity and obedience, which are examples of majority influence. And now we need to look at minority influence. So it's from page 49 in your booklet. And we will find out what minority influence is, and we'll look at the role of consistency, flexibility, and commitment when investigating minority influence. So minority influence is a form of social influence which occurs when an individual or a small group influence a larger group. So with majority influence, with conformity and obedience, what we've been looking at is a bigger group influencing a small group, and what minority influence is a small group influencing a big group. So what happens here is you have a process of conversion as opposed to compliance, which is a deeper level of processing and tends to outlast the group. So minority influence tends to lead to internalization. Majority influence tends to lead to compliance. And that's because you have this concept called conversion. So where with a majority being influenced by a minority, what tends to happen is they tend to have their general views questioned, and that leads to a conversion of their views towards the minority, and that's more likely to lead to internalization. So Moscovici proposed 4 behavioural styles that a minority would need to have to be successful. So for a minority to exert any influence, they would have to be consistent, they would have to be committed, they would have to be flexible, and they would have to be relevant to society. There's space to make some notes on this on page 49 in your booklet. The first one is consistency. So over time, consistency in a minority's views increases the amount of interest from other people, and a consistency can make other people rethink their own views. There are 2 types of consistency. There's synchronic consistency and there's diachronic consistency. So one is where people in the minority are all saying the same thing, and then diachronic is where these people have been saying the same thing for quite a long time. Then you have commitment, which is hard to do without appearing inflexible. Commitment's important because it suggests certainty and confidence when being opposed to a majority. And to join a minority, the degree of commitment is higher because the cost to the individual is higher in a minority than it is in a majority. So because of this commitment, the minority are more likely to persuade the majority to take them seriously or to convert to their position. This can sometimes be explained by the term the augmentation principle, which is someone's ability to suffer. So if someone looks like they've committed to a group and they've suffered to be part of the group, they look like they're more committed and you're more likely to take their opinion seriously. The third concept is flexibility. The argument is it's really important how the majority interprets consistency. If a consistent minority is seen as inflexible or uncompromising, they'll be unlikely to change the views of the majority. However, if they appear slightly flexible and compromising, they're likely to be seen as less extreme, and more cooperative and more reasonable, and therefore they'll have a better chance of changing the majority view. Nemeth argued that if a minority is seen as being inflexible, the majority are unlikely to change and follow them. The minority, should balance consistency and flexibility. So they want to be consistent in their views, but have some kind of wiggle room in there. And then you've got the process of change. So all of these factors make people think about the topic that the minority are proposing. And over time, people can become converted and switch from the minority to the majority. And the more this happens, the faster the rate of conversion. And it's something called the snowball effect. So the snowball effect is where a minority has an influence, and gradually over time, that minority becomes the majority. And that's usually when social change has occurred. It's also been suggested that society has to be ready to accept the change and that the ideas of the minority need to be relevant to society. So an example that AQA used for this is gay marriage. So it would not have been accepted by the majority in the 1950s due to the social situation at the time. But in order for that minority influence to become a majority viewpoint, then society had to be ready. There needs to be a relevance to society of the viewpoint that the minority is making. There's a study in your booklet by Moscovici, which is called the Blue Slide, Green Slide Study. It's on page 50 in your booklets, and this demonstrates minority influence. And there's some research that shows the limitations of minority influence studies in labs. So Sampson in particular is critical of minority influence because he says that the tasks are very artificial. On page 51 of your booklets, there's some questions about Nemeth's research that provide evidence for other behavioural styles. And this is a potential 16-mark question. So outline and evaluate research into minority influence. So the plan on the slide here shows you potentially what could be in your A01 and what could be in your A03 for this essay. In your booklet on page 53, there are 2 sample answers. Look at the answers and decide what marks you would give them. This is the mark scheme here. And then how would you feed back to the students? So this is potential feedback for Maisie's answer. And then potential feedback there for Kieran's answer. Kieran's answer is by far the better answer. Here is another 8-mark question. Using your knowledge of conformity and minority influence, explain the factors that will determine how successful the small group of students will be. So that's consistency, flexibility, and relevance to society, and commitment. Those are the 4 factors you want to be thinking about here. And this is a 4-mark question. So in an exam, you should be aware that you could answer a question specifically on the consistency, flexibility, commitment by themselves, or you could be asked about their role collectively in minority influence.